Okay, as we finish up with Nietzsche's genealogy of morals, I want to talk about perhaps Nietzsche's most famous concept. I mean, among others, but I think it's the most, if not the most famous, in some ways, the most familiar to us. Maybe we don't know Nietzsche came up with it. It's Nietzsche's idea of the Superman, or the Übermensch, or sometimes it's translated the Overman. And what the Superman is, or the Übermensch, is Nietzsche's response to the death of God. Okay, so we've been talking about the genealogy of morals, telling the history of humanity in terms of will to power and how that eventually played out in the West in terms of Christianity and Platonism, but really in terms of Christianity, where we became these resentful, clever creatures who, through their Christianity and through Christianity, led to something like modern science, which eventually killed Christianity and itself. So Nietzsche's telling the historical genealogical narrative of how we got to the place we are. And it involves becoming resentful, becoming clever, becoming Christian, becoming scientific, and then scientistic, and then destroying the whole thing. And the key is we don't yet know it's totally destroyed. So Nietzsche's trying to figure out, how do we respond to this when we figure out what happened? And his response, well, there's a twofold response, Nietzsche thinks. There's two possibilities that can happen. One, we become the Übermensch. We transcend humanity as we understand it. Or we become what he calls the last men, which are decadent, nihilistic, I guess you could say alcoholics who just throw up their hands and drink themselves to death, saying there's no point to life. Why don't we just, die out? Nietzsche has higher hopes for that. He thinks life is something that ought to be affirmed rather than, again, denied, like something like Christianity's done, or even something like the last men would do. So what is the Übermensch? What is the Übermensch that is this response to the wake of the death of God? Well, etymologically, Übermensch, or Superman, just means, in German, Über means above or beyond or to transcend, and Mensch means human being. So the Übermensch is a being that transcends humanity. It's something beyond humanity. It's a super person in a certain sense. And there are two elements of this Übermensch. One is the Übermensch is a conscious creator of values. It's a conscious value creator. In other words, Nietzsche thinks the Übermensch has to be someone who can create their own values and define their own life and live based on the conscious, fictitious values that they've created. And Nietzsche says this over and over in different places, that what will to power wants is challenges. It ultimately wants obstacles to overcome. What is power? The idea, or what is happiness? The idea that resistance has been overcome. And so the Übermensch is this person who creates values so as to challenge himself or herself to overcome those values. That's happiness for Nietzsche, the overcoming of values. So in a certain sense, what will to power wants, and what it always wanted, was the insurmountable obstacle, the obstacle that cannot be overcome so as to challenge itself, okay? And the Übermensch is someone who works with will to power, works with life, the will to life, and creates these values artistically. Nietzsche sometimes says this is the eclipse of truth in favor of art, or we become artists or poets, or even tragic poets who give themselves value and overcome these values. And this enables us in a certain sense to face the absurdity of existence, because Nietzsche is still a metaphysical nihilist. We face the absurdity of existence tragically and beautifully. We can see beauty in the absurdity to things. Nietzsche had a special place in his heart for tragedy. Nietzsche thought that tragedy allowed us, particularly Greek tragedy, allowed us to face the absurdity of existence, to feel the nausea, and he uses that word of absurdity, of the absurdity of existence, but also be moved by it, be moved to tears by it, and feel the beauty of it, and to suffer with it. And the other thing is that Nietzsche sometimes calls the Übermensch, or this kind of idea of the Übermensch, a tragic poet, someone that can tell lies about existence, but beautiful lies in a certain sense. And this has to do with Nietzsche's conception of art over truth. Art, Nietzsche thinks, is a conscious lie. Truth is a forgotten lie. Everything's a lie for Nietzsche. There is no truth. But are you conscious of your lying, or are you unconscious of your lying? And art, the artist, is aware that he or she is lying. And that's, the Übermensch in a certain sense, as a value creator working with will to power, is aware that when he or she creates values, they're merely stabilizing the chaos of becoming that is reality into being. That itself is a lie. We're painting on a meaning, on a blank canvas. We're painting meaning on a blank canvas, okay? We're defining our own lives. We're becoming, in a sense, gods for Nietzsche. So that's the first point of the Übermensch. Second point, somewhat more interesting, because I'm not sure that we can actually do that. I'm not sure we can actually find value or meaning in something we know isn't valuable or meaningful. We'll talk about that when we criticize Nietzsche, or when I criticize Nietzsche, or we look at him critically. The second point about who the Übermensch is, or what constitutes the Übermensch, is free from revenge. The Übermensch is free of revenge. He or she is revenge-free, resentment-free, free of ressentiment. That is, free of the revenge that would deny life, right? So the Übermensch is not one who denies life via revenge and resentment, but rather, and weakness, right? The Übermensch is one who affirms life in his or her strength and power. So remember, resentment comes out of the feeling of weakness. The Übermensch is fully alive, fully powerful. His will to power is heightened because of the resistances and the values he's posited or she's posited to overcome. So the Übermensch is free from revenge and therefore affirmative of life. Okay? There is no flight to the other world. There's no being brought down by values like compassion that simply bring you down. Rather, the Übermensch affirms life and therefore can say, what does not kill me makes me stronger. Or sometimes Nietzsche puts it this way, the Übermensch can say, amor fati, or love of fate. The Übermensch has this philosophy of he or she loves his destiny, or her destiny. We affirm life as the Übermensch. Now, how do you do this? This is the interesting point. How do you affirm life? How do you overcome revenge for Nietzsche? And this brings us to another well-known concept in Nietzsche, namely the eternal return or the eternal recurrence of the same, which we'll talk about in the next video.